Foremost, I want to say thank you for a great semester. This was probably one of the best classes I've taken for my major. It was just super interactive and not quite like my other like PR classes, where a lot of it is just focused on like information recall and that kind of stuff. So I really appreciated having the more like conversational structure for this class. But yeah, um, so my biggest key learning point is more just the importance of like a diverse understanding, and how we're supposed to use that as professionals and recognize, um, people that aren't like us. And that kind of aligns with our learning objective that talks about communication across different races and genders and abilities, both in the United States and globally. Just because everyone is so different and everyone sort of processes these kinds of things differently, I think it's really important to look at. And I kind of realized, just as someone who works in media and works with a lot of like social media and that kind of stuff, that when I'm creating content, especially for like brands, and right now I work in a corporate setting, I'm the person that's in charge of sort of shaping the narrative that the company is sharing with the public. And so I think that that's really important to kind of recognize, who's going to be seeing this kind of stuff and how it's going to affect them. Um, I think it really kind of opened my eyes on how easy it is to sort of unintentionally like reinforce stereotypes across groups. And I think a lot of the times people aren't ill intended when they're doing this, and they just don't even realize, especially like me being someone, I grew up in a super small town in the middle of nowhere. I mean, lower middle class white people pretty much around my entire life. And I was lucky enough to grow up with parents with, a lot of travel experience, and they lived other places, especially my dad. And they kind of opened my eyes up. But then I look at a lot of my peers, and they, never left their hometown and don't know any different. And I don't think that they're bad people for their prejudices, but I think that they just don't know. I think that this class was a great example of how, people could kind of open up. And I think especially like relating to media, like when I would watch like TV shows, obviously well not obviously, I guess you wouldn't know this, but I am a straight middle class white woman. So, a lot of the media I consume relates around that and relates around my interests, which is fine, but it also means that I'm missing out on an entire other, sector of media consumption. And I think for me in the future, after kind of looking at all of this, I can kind of look at, okay, who is this? Who is going to see this? Who does this represent? Does this represent the vast majority? Is this only representing, me in my department? Or can other people kind of relate to this? And, in terms of, I guess that's in terms of like social media content and stuff, which is mainly what I work in. I think for me, I have two favorite modules, I guess. I really like the gender and media module. That's one that I already had background information on. Being a woman, you kind of recognize that kind of stuff a little easier, I think, sometimes, which, that may just be me, I don't know. Um, but I think kind of looking at how women are represented, especially women of other races are represented in media, is really important to kind of combat some of those stereotypes, especially after going through things like my advertising classes where, they'll lightly touch on like the sexualization of women in media, especially in advertisement, um, and especially women of color. And then kind of going into this class, taking more of a look at that, was really nice. And then I think my other favorite module was our last one, which is the one about religion. And I really wish, I think I put this in my review as well, but I really wish we had spent more time on that. Just because I think for the vast majority of us, especially in our class, are, um, Christians or associated with that. I am not religious, but I did grow up going to church. and going to like a Methodist Christian church. And so, again, I was lucky enough. My parents are very open and always exposed us to other things. Like my mom has always been super interested in Buddhism and has read a lot of books about it, and been very open with that. And I know a lot of other people don't have those kinds of experiences, especially where we live. So I think it would be great to kind of expand on that just a little bit more, and kind of see, you know, what
Think about it, I guess. And I know it's the last week, so it's kind of hard to squeeze all of that in, but I think sort of spacing out that segment, I guess, because I really enjoyed it, and I personally really enjoy learning about other religions because I think that is such a huge impact on the way people view the world as their, religious identity, if they have one or not, and what it is, can really shape how they view people, how they view race and how they view gender. And like, I think that is a very big, like, over encompassing thing that would be really worth spending a little bit more time on. But it was still one of my favorite ones to look at just because I think it has such a big impact. Um, and for me as a media professional, I know I kind of touched on it earlier, but I think that I guess I just want to look at it as well representing my audience. And, that can vary depending on what I'm looking at. So, like right now, I work in corporate communications for a construction company. So our audience is dominantly men and it's dominantly white men. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's important that the minority groups that we have working for us also feel represented because we do have women in the field and we do have, workers in the field of other races and other religions and other identities that, it's important to touch on. And, we ran into this problem a couple weeks ago. We're having a Daughter's Day or like a Children's Day or something like that. This project started before I got there, but we're designing shirts for it, and one of the shirts says, "My dad works at Miller Pipeline." And this was no harm against the person who designed the shirt, but I simply kind of questioned. I was like, well, we have women in the field. Do their daughters not get to celebrate this? Just because it's their mom working for Miller Pipeline and not their dad? And, that's such a simple thing. It was just an oversight that nobody kind of really thought of just because it is outside of the norm. And I think that going through this class kind of put me in that headspace to look at it in that critical way and sort of, bring that to their attention so that they could understand it. Um, and yeah, I think for me and my writing, especially my personal writing, I think it's important that I continue to seek out diverse points of view and all of that kind of stuff just to make sure that, there's a well-rounded representation of voices, no matter what I'm producing. And yeah, it's just like, especially the media that we consume, especially social media, I feel like is such a mold for how we see everyone else and how we see the world, that it's really important to kind of look at it critically and see what it's actually saying. And this class kind of helped me have the building blocks to do that.